What if Bismarck fought King George v1v1? May 1941. The Atlantic Ocean is about to witness the most brutal naval execution in history. The German battleship Bismarck, Hitler's ultimate weapon, is dead in the water, cornered by an entire British armada. But history books lied to you. The British claimed their flagship, HMS King George V, easily crushed the German Titan. But what they conveniently left out is that Bismarck was already blind, crippled, and unable to steer before the final battle even began. So, let's strip away the propaganda. Let's erase the British torpedo bombers, the Royal Navy cruisers, and the luck. What if these two apex predators met in a flat-out, 1 versus 1, winner-takes-all deathmatch in the open ocean, both fully operational, both hunting for blood? Would Bismarck truly rule the waves? Or would Britain's ultimate treaty battleship prove that engineering beats brute force? The answer is not what you think, and the fatal flaw of one of these ships will leave you speechless. To understand who survives, we must look at what they brought to the arena. And right off the bat, Germany cheated. Under international treaties, battleships were strictly capped at 35,000 tons. Great Britain, playing by the rules, built HMS King George V or KGV right at that limit. But Hitler, he didn't care. Bismarck was a monstrous 42,000-ton heavyweight. Bismarck carried 8 massive 380mm guns. These weapons were terrifying. They fired highly aerodynamic, 800-kilogram shells at blistering speeds. Bismarck's fire control was mechanical poetry, fast, deadly accurate, and controlled by world-class optical rangefinders. But look at the British challenger. KGV entered the ring with smaller 356mm guns. Sounds like a disadvantage, right? Not so fast. The British engineered a radical solution. They packed 10 guns onto the ship using massive, unique 4-gun turrets. In a single broadside, KGV could throw 10 shells against Bismarck's 8. In the brutal mathematics of naval warfare, more steel in the air usually means more destruction. But as we are about to see, Britain's radical engineering hit a catastrophic nightmare. Before the first shell is even fired, we have to look at how these titans took a punch. This is where the tactics of this duel get fascinating, because their armor philosophies were completely opposite. Bismarck utilized the legendary German turtleback armor design. Imagine an internal sloped armored deck shaped like a turtle shell inside the ship. If a shell hits Bismarck's side at close range, it penetrates the outer wall, hits that steep internal slope, and ricochets away from the vital engines and magazines. It made Bismarck virtually unsinkable at close quarters. But the turtleback had a massive, hidden weakness: long-range fire. At distances over 20 kilometers, shells don't hit the side of a ship, they fall from the sky like meteors. And Bismarck's top deck armor was dangerously thin. Now look at KGV. The British went with the all-or-nothing scheme. They built a massive, thick armored box around the ship's vital organs. It offered incredible protection against those plunging, long-range shells. So, the stage is set. KGV wants a long-range sniper duel. Bismarck wants a close-range brawl. Who gets their way? Let's play the simulation. The distance is 24 kilometers. The two steel monsters spot each other on radar. Bismarck has the speed advantage, 30 knots against KGV's 28. This means Bismarck dictates the terms of the engagement. But the British open fire first. A wall of 10 British shells roars toward the German raider. At this distance, KGV's heavy plunging fire is lethal. A shell punches right through Bismarck's upper deck, knocking out her forward radar and severing electrical lines. Bismarck's eyes are partially blinded. The German crew responds instantly. Their optics are untouched. Bismarck's guns roar. Because of their incredible rate of fire, the Germans reload faster than the British. Straddles. Water columns erupt all around KGV. A German 380mm shell smashes into KGV's superstructure, wiping out the bridge electronics. And right here, at the turning point of the battle, disaster strikes the Royal Navy. Remember those brilliant 4-gun turrets? They were a mechanical disaster in reality. Due to overly complex safety hatches designed to prevent fires, the machinery was prone to jamming under the violent shock of firing. Suddenly, KGV's turret jams. Just like that, Britain's firepower drops by 40%. The British sailors are frantically working with crowbars in the dark, while Bismarck is turning the ocean into a living hell. With the British guns choking, Bismarck closes the distance to 14 kilometers. Now, they are in the German sweet spot. At this range, Bismarck's turtleback armor is completely impenetrable to the remaining British guns. KGV fights bravely, but it's an execution. German shells smash into KGV's unarmored bow, flooding the ship and slowing her down. Minutes later, another German shell pierces the British waterline. So, what is the ultimate verdict of the Iron Wave simulation? In a strict one-on-one duel, Bismarck wins 65% of the time. While King George V was a masterpiece of treaty engineering, it's overcomplicated. Unreliable guns were its death sentence. In a real, brutal duel to the death, mechanical reliability beats theoretical firepower every single time. Bismarck would have left the British flagship burning at the bottom of the Atlantic. But what do you think? Could British grit have overcome the German steel? Let me know in the comments below, smash that like button, and subscribe to Iron Waves for more uncovered naval history. Until next time, fighters, 52,000 tons of German steel, 8 380mm guns. The largest battleship ever built in Europe. Hitler called it his ultimate weapon. Winston Churchill called it a beast that had to be destroyed at all costs. But the dark truth history books usually gloss over is that the Tirpitz was a total failure. It was the most expensive, useless, and strategically bankrupt waste of resources in the entire history of naval warfare. While German soldiers were freezing to death at Stalingrad and the Luftwaffe was grounded due to catastrophic fuel shortages, this metal monster did absolutely nothing. It sat in a Norwegian fjord, burning through thousands of tons of scarce oil just to keep its lights on. This is the untold story of how Germany's most terrifying battleship became Hitler's biggest military blunder. To understand why the Tirpitz was a disaster, you have to look at the massive strategic delusion behind it. The ship was engineered for a war that didn't exist. Germany's grand naval strategy, Plan Z, was designed to build a massive surface fleet to challenge the British Royal Navy in a classic World War I-style showdown. But by 1941, the rules of naval engagement had changed forever. The era of the battleship was dead. The age of the aircraft carrier and the submarine had arrived. The turning point happened in May 1941, when the British Royal Navy hunted down and sank the Tirpitz's twin brother, the Bismarck. This sent Hitler into a state of absolute paranoia. He became terrified of losing his precious capital ships. As a result, he explicitly ordered that the Tirpitz was never allowed to break out into the open Atlantic to hunt Allied convoys. Think about that. The most powerful weapon in the German Navy was banned from fighting. Instead, Hitler sent the Tirpitz to hide in the remote fjords of Norway. A ship that cost millions of Reichsmarks and took years to build was instantly demoted to nothing more than a glorified, floating coastal defense battery. But the real tragedy for Germany wasn't just that the Tirpitz was hiding. The real tragedy was the catastrophic logistical nightmare it created just by existing. Let's look at the brutal, unvarnished numbers. To move the Tirpitz from Germany to Norway, the Kriegsmarine had to burn through thousands of tons of high-grade fuel oil. For a country cut off from global oil supplies, every drop of fuel was life or death. Just keeping the Tirpitz's massive boilers warm while it sat stationary in the Arctic cold consumed roughly 3,000 tons of fuel every single month. Whenever the ship actually turned its engines on to change positions, it swallowed up to 700 tons of oil per hour. This was fuel that could have powered hundreds of panzers on the Eastern Front, or fueled dozens of fighter jets defending German cities from Allied bombings. Instead, it was burned to keep a useless steel fortress warm in a Norwegian ditch. It gets worse. The Tirpitz required a permanent crew of over 2,000 elite, highly trained naval personnel, while the German army was scraping the bottom of the barrel, drafting teenagers and old men to fight a losing war. 2,000 of Germany's finest sailors were trapped in a fjord, painting a ship and cutting down trees to use as camouflage. The Tirpitz did launch a few missions, but they read like a dark comedy. Its most famous offensive operation was Operation Sicilian in September 1943. The target, a defenseless, civilian weather station on the Arctic island of Spitsbergen. The mightiest battleship in Europe sailed out with a massive escort fleet, pointed its devastating 15-inch guns at a tiny wooden shack, guarded by 30 poorly armed Norwegians, and opened fire. The Tirpitz leveled the weather station, landed some troops, and immediately sailed back to hide in its fjord. It burned hundreds of tons of irreplaceable fuel to destroy a weather station. This wasn't military glory, it was an expensive logistical joke. The ultimate irony of the Tirpitz is that its only real success happened purely by accident, without the ship firing a single shot. This was the tragedy of convoy PQ-17 in July 1942, when the British Admiralty heard a rumor that the Tirpitz was leaving its fjord to intercept a massive Allied supply convoy heading to Russia. Panic set in. The British ordered the naval escorts to retreat and told the merchant ships to scatter, left completely defenseless. 24 out of 35 merchant ships were picked off and slaughtered one by German U-boats and aircraft. The Tirpitz never even reached the convoy. The mere rumor of its presence did the damage. But this fluke success couldn't save the battleship from its inevitable fate. The British became obsessed with destroying the beast. Because the Tirpitz was heavily protected by steep mountains, anti-torpedo nets, and thick smoke screens, regular bombing raids were useless. The British had to invent entirely new ways to kill it. They tried midget submarines, human torpedoes, and carrier-launched airstrikes. Finally, the Royal Navy turned to the RAF's legendary 617 Squadron, the Dam Busters. They armed Lancaster bombers with the ultimate bunker buster, the Tall Boy bomb. This was a 5-ton aerodynamic monster designed to penetrate deep into the earth, or through feet of solid armor plate, before detonating. On November 12, 1944, the British caught the Tirpitz outside the city of Troms. The Tall Boy bomb scored direct hits, ripping right through the battleship's heavily armored deck. Another hit near the side, blasting away the ship's underwater protection. Within minutes, the internal explosions tore the ship apart. The mighty Tirpitz capsized, turning upside down in the shallow water, trapping nearly 1,000 German sailors beneath its hull. When you look at the entire timeline, the verdict is undeniable. The Tirpitz didn't defend Germany. It didn't stop the Allied advance. It didn't strangle British supply lines. Instead, it acted as a massive parasite on the German war machine. It drained the Reich of thousands of tons of critical fuel, tied down thousands of elite troops, and consumed millions in resources, all to achieve absolutely nothing. Before being obliterated by British engineering, Hitler wanted a symbol of unstoppable power. Instead, he built a 52,000-ton monument to strategic failure. Imagine a warship so colossally massive, so absurdly heavy, that it doesn't just dominate the ocean, it literally cannot enter any harbor on planet Earth. Imagine a ship with guns so enormous that firing a single salvo would shatter every window for miles around and cause a minor earthquake. This wasn't a sci-fi movie. This was a real, top-secret project approved at the highest levels of the Nazi regime. This is the story of the H-44, the ultimate manifestation of Adolf Hitler's untamed megalomania. A theoretical 140,000-ton Leviathan that was designed to make the legendary Bismarck look like a fragile toy boat. During the height of World War I, as Germany's armies were starting to fracture on the Eastern Front, and Allied bombs were leveling Nazi factories, a group of naval engineers weren't focusing on reality. Instead, they were locked in a room, drawing up blueprints for a ship that defied the laws of physics and economics. But why? Why would a nation starved of oil, steel, and time waste its brightest minds on a ship that could never be built? And more importantly, what would have happened if Hitler actually managed to put this terrifying monster into the water? Today, we are stripping away the myths and diving deep into the terrifying, absurd, and completely insane reality of Germany's ultimate phantom warship, the H-44 super battleship. To understand the madness of the H-44, we have to go back to Plan Z. Before World War I even began, Germany had a dream to challenge the British Royal Navy for total control of the Atlantic. This grand strategy was called Plan Z. It called for a massive fleet of modern battleships, carriers, and cruisers. At the heart of this plan was the H-class. Now, the German Navy didn't name their planned ships right away, they used letters. The famous Bismarck was F, and her sister ship Tirpitz was G. Naturally, the next generation was designated as H. The original Project H, designed in 1939, was somewhat reasonable. It was going to be a 55,000-ton battleship, slightly bigger than the Bismarck, armed with 406mm guns. They actually laid down the keels for two of these ships, known as H-39. But then, World War I broke out. Steel was diverted to tanks and U-boats. Construction stopped. But Hitler's obsession didn't stop. As the war progressed, British bombs kept getting bigger, and Allied air power began to dominate the skies. Instead of realizing that the era of the battleship was over, Hitler and his Naval Design Bureau came to a completely delusional conclusion. We don't need to stop building battleships. We just need to make them so big that no bomb on Earth can penetrate them. And so began a dark competition among Nazi naval architects. Year after year, the designs grew. H-39 evolved into H-41, then H-42, then H-43, and finally, in 1944, as the Third Reich was staring down total collapse, they reached the absolute peak of engineering insanity. The H-44. Let's talk numbers, because the statistics of the H-44 read like something out of a fictional steampunk novel. First, let's look at the size. The Bismarck, which was already a massive headache for the Allies, was about 250 meters long and weighed around 50,000 tons when fully loaded. The H-44. It was designed to be 345 meters long. That is over 1,100 feet. To put that into perspective, the H-44 would be longer than a modern American Nimitz-class nuclear aircraft carrier. It was designed to weigh a staggering 141,000 tons. That is nearly 3 times the weight of the Bismarck. But a ship is only as scary as its weapons. The main battery of the H-44 was designed to consist of 8 508mm guns or 20-inch monsters, mounted in 4 twin turrets. To understand how terrifying that is, no battleship in history ever carried 20-inch guns. The Japanese Yamato, the heaviest battleship ever actually built, carried 18.1-inch guns, which were already considered the pinnacle of naval artillery. A single shell from the H-44 would weigh as much as a literal SUV. If a salvo from this ship hit a coastal city, it would instantly wipe out entire city blocks. And then there was the armor. The H-44's deck armor alone was designed to be up to 330 millimeters thick. The engineers boasted that this ship could take a direct hit from a 10,000-pound tallboy earthquake bomb dropped from a British Lancaster bomber, and barely feel a scratch. The hull was so heavily armored against torpedoes that it was practically a floating fortress. To move this monstrous mountain of steel through the water, the design called for a massive hybrid propulsion system, a combination of massive steam turbines and giant diesel engines generating over 270,000 horsepower. The goal was a top speed of 30 knots. Think about that for a second. A 140,000-ton city made of steel, moving through the ocean at the speed of a modern highway cruise. It sounds unstoppable. It sounds like the ultimate weapon. But in reality, it was an engineering joke. Here is the twist that the Nazi designers chose to ignore. The H-44 was fundamentally broken. It was a logistical and tactical nightmare that would have been more dangerous to Germany than to the Allies. Flaw number 1. The harbor problem. Where do you park a 140,000-ton ship? The answer is nowhere. The H-44 required a draft of nearly 13 meters. That means it sat so deep in the water that it could not enter almost any major German port or river mouth. The North Sea is notoriously shallow. The English Channel is tricky. The H-44 would be in constant danger of running itself aground. Germany would have had to spend years dredging out entire harbors and building bespoke, colossal dry decks just to maintain a single ship. Flaw number 2. The fuel crisis. By 1944, the German Luftwaffe was grounded and panzer divisions were abandoned on the battlefields for one simple reason. Germany had no oil. A single voyage of the H-44 would have consumed millions of gallons of fuel. To fill the tanks of this one super battleship, Hitler would have had to literally starve the rest of his entire military of fuel for months. It would be a giant, hungry parasite draining the Reich's remaining resources. Flaw number 3. The Yamato lesson. But let's say they built it. Let's say they found the steel, found the fuel, and managed to float it out into the Atlantic. What happens next? The exact same thing that happened to the Japanese super battleships Yamato and Musashi. By 1944, the era of the battleship was completely over. It didn't matter how thick your armor was or how big your guns were. A battleship cannot shoot at a plane that is 50 miles away. The Allies would not have sent their own battleships to fight the H-44 in a heroic, honorable duel. They would have sent 5, 6, or 7 aircraft carriers. They would have launched hundreds of dive bombers and torpedo planes. No matter how much anti-aircraft weaponry you cram onto the deck of the H-44, it cannot stop a swarm of 300 aircraft attacking from every direction simultaneously. Eventually, the rudders would be jammed, the superstructure would be burned to a crisp, and the ocean would claim another multi-billion-dollar steel coffin. The H-44 was never built because it was never meant to be built. By 1944, the German Naval High Command knew the war was lost. The engineers weren't designing a weapon for World War I, they were designing a fantasy. To keep Hitler happy, and quite frankly, to keep themselves from being sent to the brutal meat grinder of the Soviet front lines. As long as they were working on vital secret weapons for the Fuhrer, they were safe in their design offices. The H-44 remains one of history's most fascinating what-if concepts. It represents the absolute limit of what naval architects thought was possible. Before naval aviation and nuclear weapons changed warfare forever, it was a ship born out of desperation, fueled by madness, and sunk by reality before a single piece of steel was ever cut. What do you think? If Germany had somehow miraculously built the H-44 in 1939 before the war started, could it have changed the course of history? Or would the Royal Navy have turned it into the world's most expensive artificial reef anyway? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into naval history, and shatter that notification bell. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon. The North Atlantic, December 26, 1943. A blinding Arctic blizzard, sub-zero temperatures, and pitch-black polar night. Through the towering walls of freezing water, a steel leviathan is hunting. It is the German capital ship Scharnhorst, Hitler's most elusive predator. For years, this single ship has been a ghost in the fog, a nightmare that kept Winston Churchill awake at night. But on this day, the hunter is about to become the hunted. This is not just a story of a sea battle, it is the chronicle of a high-stakes tactical chess match, a fatal technological blind spot, and one of the most ferocious, desperate final stands in naval history. To understand why the British Royal Navy was so obsessed with destroying Scharnhorst, we have to look at her reputation. She wasn't just a ship, she was a ghost. Together with her sister ship, Gneisenau, Scharnhorst practiced a terrifying brand of naval warfare, hit-and-run piracy on a colossal scale. In 1940, she accomplished something civilian strategists thought impossible. She caught the British aircraft carrier HMS Glorious by surprise and sank her from a staggering distance of over 24 kilometers. But her ultimate insult to the British Empire came during Operation Cerberus. In broad daylight, right through the English Channel, the Royal Navy's own backyard, Scharnhorst sailed past British coastal guns, mines, and torpedo boats, completely untouched. The British press was furious. London wanted blood. The Admiralty didn't just want Scharnhorst sunk, they needed her eliminated to restore their national pride. By late 1943, Germany was losing the war, and Hitler's surface fleet was trapped in the Norwegian fjords, starved of fuel. Yet, there was one vital lifeline left for the Allies that Germany could still sever: the Arctic convoys. These merchant fleets carried thousands of American tanks, planes, and supplies through the freezing Barents Sea to the Soviet Union. If those supplies were stopped, the Eastern Front could collapse. On Christmas Day, 1943, the order came down from the German High Command. Operation Ostfront was a go. Scharnhorst, commanded by Rear Admiral Erich Bay, untied her moorings and slipped into the stormy, pitch-black ocean. Her mission was simple: find convoy JW55B and annihilate it. What Admiral Bay did not know was that he was sailing straight into a masterfully orchestrated death trap. The British had broken the German Enigma codes. They knew Scharnhorst was coming before she even cleared the fjord. As Scharnhorst closed in on the convoy's suspected position on the morning of December 26th, the lookouts saw nothing but driving snow and black waves. But while the Germans were relying on human eyes, the British were using invisible waves. A squadron of British cruisers, led by HMS Belfast and HMS Norfolk, detected the German giant on their radar screens. At exactly 9:24 a.m., the frozen darkness was shattered by British star shells, illuminating the sleek, gray hull of Scharnhorst. Seconds later, the heavy guns of the British cruisers opened fire. The Battle of the Nordkapp had begun. The opening minutes of the clash produced a catastrophic, silent disaster for the German ship. A 203mm shell from HMS Norfolk crashed into Scharnhorst's superstructure. It didn't sink her, and it didn't slow her down. But it did something worse. It completely obliterated her forward radar eyes. In an instant, in the middle of a blinding blizzard and total polar darkness, Scharnhorst was blinded from the front. She could no longer see her enemies before they could see her. Admiral Bay, realizing he was outmatched by the cruiser screen and unable to locate the merchant ships, in the blindness of the storm, turned his ship south. He decided to abort the mission and head for the safety of Norway. With her superior speed of over 31 knots, Scharnhorst easily began to outrun the British cruisers. The German crew believed they had escaped yet again. The ghost ship was slipping away into the dark. But the British commander, Admiral Bruce Fraser, had one final card to play. Sailing from the southwest, completely undetected, was the Royal Navy's heavy hitter, the battleship HMS Duke of York, armed with 10 massive 356mm guns. At 4:50 p.m., the Duke of York's radar locked onto the unsuspecting Scharnhorst. The British battleship unleashed a full, devastating broadside. The night sky turned orange as 5 tons of high explosives screamed through the Arctic air. The first salvo hit Scharnhorst with absolute brutality. The shells tore through her deck, instantly knocking out her forward main turret, freezing the guns in place. The German ship was rocked by violent explosions, but her heavy armor belt held, and her engines kept screaming. For more than an hour, a running artillery duel raged in the dark. Scharnhorst fought like a cornered beast, firing back with her remaining guns, twisting and turning through the heavy seas to throw off the British radar tracking. Against all odds, Scharnhorst's incredible speed was saving her again. She was slowly pulling out of the range of the Duke of York's heavy guns. The distance was widening. Safety and the Norwegian coast were almost within reach. Then came the fatal blow. At a distance of nearly 18 kilometers, a final, desperate shell from the Duke of York plunged from the sky, pierced Scharnhorst's thin upper deck armor, and detonated deep inside her hull, ripping open the number 1 boiler room. In a matter of minutes, steam pressure plummeted. Scharnhorst's speed dropped from 30 knots to just 20, then 15. The ghost ship was crippled. She could no longer run. Admiral Fraser wasted no time. He ordered his accompanying destroyers to close the distance and finish her, like a pack of wolves surrounding a wounded mammoth. 4 British destroyers rushed into the spray of German secondary gunfire, launching a total of 28 torpedoes. 4 of them struck home, tearing open Scharnhorst's hull below the waterline. The ship began to list heavily to starboard, her bows settling deep into the freezing water. By 7 p.m., the situation inside the German flagship was apocalyptic. The interior was a labyrinth of smoke, fire, and twisted metal. The lights failed, leaving the crew to work by the dim glow of fires and emergency lanterns. Yet, even as the ship turned into a floating furnace, the remaining crew refused to surrender. Officers and sailors dragged ammunition by hand to the last functioning turret, firing blindly into the darkness at the shapes of British ships circling them. At 7:30 p.m., Admiral Bay sent his final radio transmission to Germany. "We shall fight to the last shell." Minutes later, a massive explosion rocked the forward section of the ship as the remaining ammunition magazines blew up. At 7:45 p.m., Scharnhorst capsized, her propellers still spinning in the freezing air, and slid beneath the black waters of the Arctic Ocean. Out of a crew of nearly 2,000 men, only 36 survived the freezing water to be rescued by the British. The victory was absolute, but it left a profound mark on the victors. Later that evening, Admiral Bruce Fraser addressed his officers aboard the Duke of York. He looked out over the dark sea where their enemy had just perished and said, "Gentlemen, the battle against Scharnhorst has ended in victory for us. I hope that if any of you are ever called upon to lead a ship into action against an opponent many times superior, you will command your ship as gallantly as Scharnhorst was commanded today." The Second World War was the ultimate testing ground for naval warfare. While battleships grabbed the headlines and aircraft carriers changed the rules of engagement, it was the destroyers that did the dirty work. These tin cans were the workhorses of every fleet, protecting convoys, hunting submarines, fending off kamikazes, and engaging in brutal, close-quarters night battles. But which destroyers were the absolute best? Today, we are counting down the top 8 most powerful and effective destroyer classes of World War E. Hit that subscribe button, clear for action, and let's dive in. Number 8. The Tribal Class, United Kingdom. We start our list with the Royal Navy's ultimate knife fighters. The Tribal Class, developed in the late 1930s, the British realized they needed something heavier to counter the massive destroyers being built by Germany and Japan. The Tribals were designed with a clear philosophy: maximize firepower. Instead of focusing on torpedoes, these ships were packed with 8 4.7-inch guns. They were built to hunt down and overwhelm enemy destroyers with sheer volume of shell fire. Ships like HMS Cossack and HMS Nubian became legends, fighting in the brutal battles of the North Sea and the Mediterranean. While they lacked heavy anti-aircraft defense early in the war, their aggressive design made them the undisputed bullies of the European theaters. Number 7. The Kajero Class, Japan. If the British Tribals were masters of the gun, the Japanese Kajero Class were the undisputed masters of the torpedo, entering the war as the backbone of the Imperial Japanese Navy's destroyer force. The Kageros were exceptionally well-built, fast, and deadly. Their secret weapon, the Type 93 Long Lance torpedo, powered by pure oxygen, these torpedoes left no wake of bubbles, traveled at insane speeds, and carried a massive warhead. In the night battles around Guadalcanal, Kajero-class destroyers routinely ambushed Allied cruisers and destroyers from distances the Allies didn't even think possible. Their only major flaw was a weak anti-aircraft suite and poor radar capability later in the war. But in a surface night fight, nothing was more terrifying. Number 6. The Type 1936. In Narvik, Germany, the German Kriegsmarine took the concept of a destroyer and tried to turn it into a cruiser. The Type 1936A, known to the Allies as the Narvik class, was an absolute beast of a ship. While most destroyers of the era carried 4.7 or 5-inch guns, the Germans upgunned the Narviks with massive 5.9-inch 150mm guns. On paper, this gave them unparalleled firepower. In reality, these heavy guns made the ship's nose heavy and difficult to handle in rough Atlantic seas. However, when the weather permitted, a Narvik-class destroyer could outgun almost any other destroyer on the planet. They were heavily armored for their size and represented a massive engineering achievement, even if they were over-engineered for their actual role. Number 5. The Akizuki-class. Japan. As the war progressed, the threat from the air became the biggest danger to surface fleets. Japan recognized this and built the Akizuki class. Unlike the Kajero class, which focused on torpedo strikes, the Akizuki was designed from the ground up as a dedicated anti-aircraft escort. The heart of the Akizuki was her main battery, a 3.9-inch 100mm Type 98 guns. These guns had an incredible rate of fire and an exceptionally high ceiling, making them arguably the best anti-aircraft guns of the war. Combined with a massive array of 25mm autocannons, the Akizukis were mobile flak towers designed to protect Japan's precious aircraft carriers. They were large, stable, and highly effective, proving that the role of the destroyer had permanently changed. Number 4. The Tashkent. Project 20I. Soviet Union nicknamed the Sky Blue Cruiser because of her unique light blue paint scheme. The Tashkent was a one-of-a-kind destroyer leader built in Italy for the Soviet Navy, and she was a masterpiece of speed and style. The Tashkent was massive, blurring the line between a destroyer and a light cruiser. During her sea trials, she reached a staggering speed of 43.5 knots, making her one of the fastest warships in the world. Armed with 6 130mm guns and enclosed turrets, she possessed incredible firepower. Her finest hour came during the siege of Sevastopol, where she used her insane speed to run German blockades, delivering ammunition and evacuating thousands of wounded soldiers under constant air attack. She was proof that speed can be the ultimate weapon. Number 3. The Jervis J-Class. United Kingdom. Returning to the Royal Navy, we have the J-Class. If you want to talk about reliability, versatility, and sheer combat experience, the J-Class, specifically ships like HMS Jervis, set the standard. The J-Class introduced a new, more compact design for British destroyers, featuring a single funnel which cleared up deck space for better firing arcs. They were tough, highly maneuverable, and heavily armed with 6 4.7-inch guns and 10 torpedo tubes. What makes them number 3 on our list is their incredible operational record. They fought in every major theater, survived unimaginable damage, and proved that a balanced design is often superior to a flashy, specialized one. HMS Jervis itself fought through the entire war without losing a single crew member. To enemy action, a legendary feat. Number 2. The Fletcher class. United States. When the United States entered the war, they needed a destroyer that could mass-produced, travel the vast distances of the Pacific, and handle any threat thrown at it. The answer was the Fletcher class. 175 of these ships were built, making it one of the most successful wartime production runs in history. The Fletcher was the perfect balance of everything. It featured a flush deck design that made it incredibly sturdy. It carried 5 5-inch dual-purpose guns controlled by the advanced Mark 37 fire control system, making them deadly against both surface targets and aircraft. As the war evolved, Fletchers were packed with 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikon guns, turning them into kamikaze shredding monsters. With excellent radar, great range, and a rugged design, the Fletcher class is considered by many to be the definitive destroyer of World War E. Number 1. The Allen M. Sumner Gearing class. United States. So, what could possibly beat the Fletcher? The evolution of the Fletcher. Late in the war, the US Navy introduced the Allen M. Sumner class, which was soon followed by the slightly longer Gearing class. These ships took everything that made the Fletcher great and dialed it up to 11. The key upgrade was the main battery. Instead of single mounts, the Sumners and Gearings carried 6 5-inch guns housed in 3 twin turrets. This doubled their forward-facing firepower. More importantly, these ships were built from day one to integrate the absolute best technology available: advanced radar, combat information centers, and an overwhelming amount of anti-aircraft weaponry. They were so advanced, rugged, and powerful that many of them continued to serve in navies around the world well into the Cold War, and even the 1980s. When it comes to pure combat capability, tech, and firepower at the end of World War E, The Sumner and Gearing classes stand undefeated at the top of the mountain. Conclusion: from the torpedo tactics of the Imperial Japanese Navy to the radar-guided firepower of the United States, destroyers evolved more than almost any other ship type during World War I. They entered the war as fragile scouts and left it as heavily armed, independent combat systems. What do you think? Did your favorite destroyer make the list? Would you put the Fletcher at number 1? Or do you think the Japanese long lances deserve more respect? Let me know in the comments below. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Fair winds and following seas.